How do you achieve digital resilience when your infrastructure spans multiple clouds, thousands of endpoints, and an ever-growing AI stack? Well, my guest today is Patrick Lin, and he's the SVP and GM of Splunk Observability at Cisco. And he joins me at Cisco Live in San Diego to unpack the next chapter in unified observability and assurance. Because in a world where digital performance defines customer experience, the gap between visibility and action can be costly. But he's going to share today how new bi-directional integrations between Splunk and Cisco ThousandEyes are designed to close that gap, connecting data across applications, infrastructure, and networks in real time. So our conversation today will explore how teams are empowered to investigate and resolve issues before they become user-facing problems. So whether you are tracking an AI model's performance or diagnosing an API latency issue in a hybrid cloud setup, the integration delivers a clear path to root cause and resolution. And we'll also discuss today how observability is evolving in this AI era. And my guest will explain how Splunk is helping organizations monitor that full LLM stack, use AI for smarter anomaly detection, and reduce alert fatigue through intelligent event correlation. And ultimately, it's a shift from reactive monitoring to proactive insight. So I want to learn more about how they're helping teams finally move from chaos to clarity. So, how are organizations turning complex environments into manageable, resilient digital ecosystems? And what role does unified observability play in a transformation like this? Well, it's time for me to introduce you to Patrick now, who hopefully has all the answers. So thank you for joining me here at Cisco Live in San Diego. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So my name's Patrick Lin. I am the SVP and General Manager for Observability with the Splunk, a Cisco company. So observability, just to sort of, maybe talk about that a little bit, I think is really kind of an evolution of what we used to think of as monitoring, right? Mm-hmm. So infrastructure monitoring, application performance monitoring, and so on. And I think that over time, people realized that the more you could bring the different signals you see at all these different layers of the technology stack, how's the application performing? What is the server underneath it doing? How is the network connecting to it doing, right? That you could make sure you could get ahead of problems, right? And then if there were problems, you could fix them more quickly and, all kind of due to the fact that you could bring those things together, right? And so I think a lot of times when people talk about observability, it is about that, right? It's the sort of aggregation of the different signals and the insights you can glean from that.
And the world of monitoring has evolved on its own, hasn't it? Because I think that a lot of people say now that if you're first alerted to an issue because of monitoring, then you're already too late if you're reacting to something, if somebody's rang it in. As you said, it's about getting ahead of the problems.
Yeah, as much as you can, right? I mean, I think that the reality is that there are always going to be things that, hit an online service, right? Things have become so complicated over the years, right? For good reasons, right? Like I think that, the architectures are intended to help with, better scalability, more responsiveness, and those kinds of things, right? But at the same time, it means that when there is a problem, oftentimes it can be hard to figure out where it's coming from, right? Mm-hmm. And so part of this is, yes, when something bad happens, you need to get to the isolation of the problem as quickly as possible, right? And hopefully you can, of course, get ahead of it. And certainly, I think there's oftentimes some sort of building thunder aspect to it, right? So maybe you can catch it early enough so that before it actually affects a significant swath of your customers or users.
And as we're at Cisco Live, a question I've got to ask is how do you see the new bi-directional integrations between Splunk Observability and Cisco ThousandEyes? How do you see that changing the game for digital resilience across so many different complex environments? What excites you about that?
Yeah. Well, I think that it's really kind of the first time you're seeing this sort of set of data being brought together, right, in a way that puts the information in the hands of users who can do something about it. So ThousandEyes is great at providing visibility into networks, whether you own them or not. right? They kind of got their start in providing visibility into how the internet is doing, right? And so when you kind of add that to all the things that we can do in Splunk Observability, whether it is looking at the actual responsiveness of the mobile app that you're using, or the services that are backing it sitting in a data center in a cloud somewhere, or how the infrastructure underpinning those services are doing, right? That combination really kind of gives us a very full picture of what is going on. And in this particular case, the bidirectional integration is about enabling you to not just sort of say, okay, hey, I've got these sets of information, but actually using it in context, right? So that if there is, an application transaction that is happening and it traverses some networks, now I can see the full path of that and dig into that from ThousandEyes or from Observability Cloud.
And if we step away from the technology just for a moment, for business leaders listening, what specific challenges are you addressing by connecting application, infrastructure and network insights and putting them in this unified view?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, this is all about, is my application that I'm putting in front of my users, my customers, my partners, whatever it is it performing the way I expect? Are they getting it, in the kind of, within the bounds of the performance and so on that they want, right? And so the more visibility you have into all the different things that could affect it, the better off you are, right? The more you're able to guarantee that that's going to be the case. So ultimately, it comes down to what people refer to as your mean time to resolution of issues, right? So MTTR, and there are variations on that, right? Like mean time to detect when there's a problem, mean time to isolate the problem and ultimately resolve it, right? And so that is really critical, I think, to any business that has a digital experience that is a core part of their offering. Right. So take any company that has an app out there today, they care about this, right? Because if the customer or the user isn't getting what they want, it's not too hard for them to switch.
And just to dig a little bit deeper on that, can you break down the integration between Splunk and ThousandEyes and how it's helping teams resolve incidents much more intelligently and more collaboratively as well? It feels like a real opportunity here.
It is, right? And I think that collaborative is really the interesting word here, because I think oftentimes, especially if you're coming from a networking background, that when something goes bad, the first thing that people say is, it must be the network, right? And I know all the networking folks are tired of hearing that, because when that's happening, actually, the application folks, the infrastructure folks are also looking at their consoles to go like, okay, do I see something wrong with mine, right? But what you really want to do is have a shared source of truth across those different environments, right? Because otherwise it ends up being I look at my set of data, but I don't know, how it relates to your set of data, right? And so with this integration, what you can actually see is this particular transaction that's happening. What is the kind of path that it's taking and how is that doing in the network? When it hits a particular service on the back end, is it kind of responding the way it is, right? So you get that very full picture. And once you have that full picture, then it's not a finger pointing exercise, because the data tells you where the issue is and you just go about fixing it rather than saying, well, not my problem. Why don't you go prove your innocence first, right?
Yeah, it ends up like the Spider-Man meme, doesn't it, with each department pointing at each other.
Exactly.
And of course, we are at a tech conference, so we've got to mention AI. So from a value add vantage point here, how are you seeing AI enhancements across Splunk App Dynamics, advancing things like incident detection and investigation, especially in high stakes environments? Because it's a real problem we're solving here with AI, isn't it?
It is. Well, I think that generally speaking, this area of how do I understand, whether I need to pay attention to something? If I do, what's the problem? How do I fix it quickly? These are things that AI can actually help a lot with, right? Mm-hmm. And so, there've been a variety of announcements here at the conference, and we've been building towards this for some time, right? Partly to be able to understand what the actual anomaly is, right? Is something behaving in a manner that is unexpected, right? And that uses actually much more kind of classical machine learning type techniques, right? Because you want to understand kind of what it's been doing historically to know whether things seem out of band, right? Once you have that, then the ability to understand how that's related to other things you might be seeing, right? So there might be an event, a code push that maybe is correlated with that, right? Or you might see something slow down with another service, right? AI can help kind of link those together and get you to a suggested root cause much more quickly, right? Now, can human beings do that? Of course they can, right? But if you can do this in a way where it's sort of working at machine speed, right? Rather than kind of trying to click around or look at different dashboards to try and correlate it in your own head, doing some kind of swivel chair process, right? Then you're going to be much better off, right? It'll be a faster kind of conclusion to that sort of thing, right? We've seen customers of ours who have been using the AI assistant, cut their time for troubleshooting in half or better. Right. And that means a lot when, you are trying to maintain high availability, 3 nines or better for your applications. Right?
And listening to conversations on the show floor here, observability for AI is a major talking point right now. So how is Splunk addressing performance monitoring across that LLM stack that we're seeing increasing with this latest release that we're talking about here?
Yeah. So, it's sort of the flip side of what I was talking about earlier, right? There's one side of this, which is how do you use AI to accelerate the outcomes from observability? And then the flip side is how do you provide observability for the AI that you are building into your applications, right? Now, in a lot of ways, this is just a newer variation of what we've seen before, because now, okay, I've got not just your CPUs, but I've got GPUs that need to be able to monitor. I've got vector databases that I'm adding to it. I've got, LLMs that are part of the application now, right? And so in a lot of ways, it's sort of just the next variation of that, right? So now I'm monitoring those things as well. I need to make sure that I have out of the box integrations for those things. And that's a lot of what we're delivering, right? The next piece is when you start to look at those as parts of the application kind of transaction that's happening, right? So before, you would have been, let's say, calling a database, querying a database to get some value to bring it back or something. Now, instead, I might be using an LLM, right? And so I need to be able to understand how that's doing, right? And that's going to be, I think, the sort of next wave here, right? Where the overall kind of way this sort of industry has moved is based on the core architectures of the applications, right? And so, when App Dynamics first got into the business, it was mostly what we would think of as 3-tier or N-tier applications, traditional architectures, right? When Splunk got into the observability business, call it more deeply, right? Call it 5 to 7 years ago, there was more of a transition toward cloud native microservice architectures, right? Which is kind of qualitatively different. And then I think what we're going to see now is the applications are going to contain Gen AI as part of the overall stack and will eventually evolve into agentic applications as well, right? You see a lot of enterprises working on those kinds of things. And so we need to provide the visibility into those, right?
And I'm curious, what other opportunities do you see ThousandEyes distributed tracing integration opening up for organizations, especially if they're running large-scale applications in anything from hybrid or multi-cloud environments? What kind of opportunities do you see there?
Well, I think that one of the things about the work that ThousandEyes does, right, is that they're able to look at not just kind of what happens in the network path in things that are kind of visible everywhere, but also inside of the public clouds themselves, right? So they release something they call Cloud Insights, which actually provides visibility into how the network inside of AWS is performing, right? And, won't be long before other kind of public cloud networks are part of that, right? And so that visibility is something that I think obviously benefits a lot of the customers of Splunk Observability, because many, if not most of them, are running significant chunks of their applications in a public cloud, right? I think the other piece that's interesting here is just the idea of using the synthetic transactions that are generated by ThousandEyes, right? And the fact that they are correlated with a particular standard we use for data in observability. It's called OpenTelemetry, right? It's a very commonly used now format for the data, the logs, the metrics and traces and so on. And if you have something that is triggering those on a regular basis, then you have actually a good idea of what baseline performance should be for all the sort of back-end services that are touched by the synthetic agent, right?
And if we look inside any organization, there are so many different monitoring and telemetry tools already in place across just about every enterprise. So how are you helping customers maybe begin consolidating and acting on their data faster?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the fundamental value proposition of a lot of what we're doing here, right? Which is providing that unified visibility across the different layers, as well as the different, call it vintages of technology that are in play in any reasonably large organization, right? And so the pieces that have come together directly within Splunk around Splunk Observability Cloud, now App Dynamics, IT Service Intelligence, these are all things that give visibility from kind of the core infrastructure up all the way through a business level and user level understanding what's going on, right? And that is work the work to sort of bring those together into a unified experience so that people who are trying to troubleshoot issues and whatnot have the sort of single source of truth to go to and a common way of looking at the data, right? Now, as part of Cisco, all of the data that is part of Cisco now can be part of that as well, right? And so one example of what we're doing here is with the integrations with Meraki and Catalyst and ThousandEyes, right? Where we're taking data from that, bringing it into the core Splunk platform, and then using IT Service Intelligence as a way to correlate all of that data, right, with other things that we see, and then very quickly help someone isolate where the problem is occurring, right? Because all that information is now kind of part of the same pool of data that we're able to analyze and provide that kind of insight for.
And does this mean, on behalf of every IT worker listening around the world, alert fatigue? Are we going to retire alert fatigue once and for all?
For sure. Well, I think that, alert fatigue comes from the fact that, oftentimes the alerts are being generated by different siloed monitoring tools that have no idea what's going on in other parts of the stack, right? And so, again, this is sort of the core value proposition that we bring with a lot of Splunk, right? Which is you aggregate that information and then you say, okay, well, out of all of these different alerts, where is the real problem, right? What is the logical incident that is emerging from this sort of flood of alerts, right? And so we've seen customers have the alerts that they actually have to respond to go down by orders of magnitude, right? Because they had so much noise before, and now we kind of help them cut through that and say, okay, this is the part that matters. Go and focus in on that and drill down there.
Yeah. And if we were to look further ahead, how do you see observability and assurance evolving in the AI era where things are going to continue to improve at a rapid rate too? So, and also where do you see Splunk fitting into this future too?
Yeah. Well, I think that there's a couple of pieces here that we think are foundational, right? One piece is just making sure that we actually are getting hold of all that different, all the different data sources, right? So making sure that whether it's, existing networks or public cloud networks or, any of the sort of AI related infrastructure or architectures being out there, making sure that we're able to capture that, right? So having that kind of visibility. The second piece is actually understanding how it's related, right? Because the faster you understand the relationships, the faster you can say, the problem is probably over here, right? And the third part is making sure we also have a good understanding of what are the change or configuration events that are happening within a given environment, right? And this is something that I think, has been understood for a bit, that it's oftentimes, a code push or a network configuration change or something like that, that is actually a thing that ultimately causes some sort of issue, right? So if you have all the visibility, if you know how it's related, and then you have an understanding of the events that are happening that are causing changes, then I think our ability with AI to get to the root cause and help you fix it much, much faster, right? So that's very much what we're working toward.
100% with you on that. And I think that is a powerful moment to end on. But before I do let you go, so many big announcements this week. If anyone wanting to stay up to speed with some of these announcements, follow the progress, find out more information about the work you're doing, where would you like to point everyone?
Well, there's a really good blog post that is out there that I co-authored with Joe Vaccaro, who's the person who heads up the ThousandEyes team. So you can go get a lot more detail on, most of what we've been talking about here. And there are a variety of other things out there for all the different announcements here from Cisco Live US.
Awesome. Well, I'll get a link to that blog post and link it on the show notes so anybody listening can find that nice and easily. And I know you've got to dash to a completely different side of the site here. So just a big thank you for taking the time out of an incredibly busy day to come and speak with me. Thank you.
Hey, Neil, thanks so much for the time.
So what does it really mean to be digitally resilient in 2025? I think Patrick helped us understand today how Splunk and Cisco are redefining that standard and doing it through smart integration, a shared context, and proactive insight right across the digital footprint. And we also heard how teams can move faster with a unified view from application to network, and how AI is surfacing real-time insights in what was previously siloed data, and how observability isn't just about visibility anymore, it's actually about action. Whether that be reducing mean time to resolution to enabling collaboration across IT ops, net ops and engineering. I think this joint solution offers more performance metrics. It's ultimately about delivering continuity, consistency and confidence in every user experience. And I also want to thank Patrick for highlighting how today's complex AI-driven applications actually require new ways of thinking, especially around monitoring LLMs, GPUs and vector databases. But Splunk Observability for AI, combined with the ThousandEyes distributed tracing integration, together they open up a clearer path through this complexity. Whether you are operating at scale in the public cloud or building next-gen digital platforms. So how ready is your organisation to act on data, not just collect it? Let me know. techblogwriter@outlook.com, LinkedIn, X, Instagram, just @NeilC.Hughes. Love to hear your thoughts on this one. But that's it from me today. Thank you for listening as always. I'll be back again very soon, waiting in your podcast feed with another guest. Hopefully, I'll speak with you all then. Bye for now.